All right, let's spend a few minutes today talking about product and brand decisions. Now, you recall that the product marketing issues that we had included which segments to serve with our particular product, what target markets we would go after, who we have to compete with, and then how we're going to position our product in terms of promotion, distribution, product, and price. Now, one of the decisions that we have to make with a product is a brand decision. The first decision, of course, would be whether to brand or not. That is the question. What about the value of a brand versus a commodity? Why is there a value in a brand? Well, without brands, how many levels of quality would there be? So if there were no brands of gasoline, just the state sold gasoline and taxed us on it. So every gasoline station just sold gasoline. Well, how many levels of quality of gasoline would there be? The answer, of course, is 1, the minimum acceptable level. So many things are branded. You're all familiar with Dole and Chiquita bananas. Now, bananas are bananas, but once I stick a label on those bananas, it is no longer just a generic banana. Now it is a branded banana. That banana is a Chiquita banana. All right, so then the second question is, who's going to sponsor a brand? Well, we start off with the idea of manufacturers' brands, and we all get this idea. A company makes a product, brands it, and sells it to the customers. By the way, not all manufacturers do this, but most manufacturers do this. My first job when I got out of college was working for a company called Westclocks, the world's largest producer of timepieces. We made Westclocks wristwatches, Westclocks alarm clocks, Westclocks mantle clocks, Westclocks grandfather clocks, Westclocks kitchen clocks, Westclocks time clocks. We made all kinds of products under our own name. We built the product, and then we put our brand name on it, okay? So that's the idea of a manufacturer's brand, okay? There are two other kinds of brands, store brands and distributor brands, okay? So a store brand is when a store, like for instance, your local Smith store, which is a Kroger store, is owned by Kroger, sells Smith's or Kroger branded stuff in their store. These are called store brands. Now, at the end of the day, Smith's doesn't make any of those brands. They get someone else to manufacture those brands under the Smith's name. So these are called store brands. Some manufacturers only make store and distributor brands. Okay, and so the same thing happens at a store. If you go to Macy's, one of Macy's brands is called the Club Room. And so if you buy a product that's a men's shirt that's called a Club Room, well, that's a store brand. And of course, Dillard's has store brands too. Things like I think there's this called Crown and York, and they have one that's they have a number of store brands that are their brands and no one else sells them. A distributor brand is like a store brand, but it might be wider. It might be based on a full distributorship strategy. But these are what we would call private label or store brands. Now, I think we talked about this in a previous slide, so I'm going to skip this. This is the idea of the kinds of core product decisions that have to be made before you can decide on the branding. But we covered this in a previous lecture. Okay, so store and distributor brands. All right. So, what are the benefits for a store to have its own brands, or a distributor or store to have its own brands? Well, the benefit is that you have a competitive advantage in differentiation. That is, I now can, if you think about someone like Kroger's or Vons, the Vons brand, and Vons is part of a larger chain, and what you will find when you look at those brands is those brands allow them to create a differentiation among stores. So so if you see the Kroger and Smith's brand, or if you see the Vons brand, it in fact creates a product differentiation. Another reason that you would have store brands is because you typically charge less money for store brands than national brands. And so you can attract price-sensitive customers to your store with a low-end or introductory brand that is a store brand. The reason you can do that is because when you buy in bulk from the national manufacturer and you put your name on it, you can get the products manufactured and sold to you at a cheaper price. Another reason that distributors often do this is because while their prices are lower, the acquisition costs are so much lower that they actually have larger margins. So someplace like Macy's would rather you bought the Macy's store brands because those brands actually have larger margins. Another reason for a distributor to have their own brands would be store loyalty. That is, if you want the brands that are the store brands for Kohl's or for Dillard's or Macy's or Nordstrom's, the only place you can get them is at their stores. And of course, so the bottom line is retailers and distributors create their own private label brands because it's profitable. So why would a manufacturer make those brands? Because in reality, at some point in time, they're just creating more competition. Well, at Westclox, we used to not only make Westclox clocks, but we used to make clocks for Walmart and Kmart and a number of other Sears and a number of other major retailers. And we always made those products because the marginal revenue of making them was higher than the marginal cost. So we kept our assembly lines busy, and every unit we made money on because the marginal revenues were higher than the marginal costs. Now, the benefit for a manufacturer is they can reach and sell product to price-sensitive customers without having any of their own new brands or their current brands involved. So I don't have to lower the price of any of my brands. I don't have to come up with a new brand. I just go ahead and sell them to a distributor, and they then sell that product. Another manufacturer logic behind why manufacturers do this is they say, if I don't, someone else will. So you can say that I'm creating new competition, but at least I'm getting some of the profits from that competition. Another reason a manufacturer might do this is for economies of scale. Many of the clocks that we made at Westclox were made out of plastic. Plastic lines need to be run all the time. If you're making plastic parts, those need to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because there's great efficiency in not having the molds cool down and heat back up. So there is a great economy of scale, and so distributor brands help create that economy of scale. So why do distributors do it? Well, there's profits in it. Why do manufacturers do it? There's profits in it. So in many cases, this turns out to be a win-win situation. Now, your book then talked about a number of different branding strategies, and they use a little bit of different terminology than I typically do, so I want to show you how these terminologies match up. One is called a multi-product branding strategy that most of us would refer to as a family branding strategy. This is where we have one brand for all of our products. Toro lawnmowers, Honda, Honda products. Honda makes motorcycles, outboard motors, automobiles, a number of different items. This is called a family branding strategy. The opposite of that is called a multi-branding strategy, or what we always refer to in the business as a individual branding strategy. Procter & Gamble is pretty good at this. So even if you think of something like dish soap, Procter & Gamble has 3 different products in that category. And so Procter & Gamble has Ivory, Joy, and Dawn as 3 products in the dish soap business. And so what they do is they go in and have different brands, and you don't know at all that they're all made by Procter & Gamble. This is called an individual strategy. Now, there is something that the book didn't spend much time talking about. There is sort of a hybrid strategy in between this, where it's a family and a sub-brand strategy. Examples of this would be automobile companies. So Ford not only makes Fords, but Ford makes F-150s and Mustangs and Explorers. And so Ford is the family brand name, but then they have sub-brand names like Mustang. And in many cases, you don't hear people talking about it as a Ford Mustang. The sub-brand is so powerful, they just refer to it as Mustang, or under the Chevrolet family brand, Camaro, or Corvette, or Silverado. All right, and so these are family and sub-branding strategies so that they have a overarching brand, but then they have individual brand names underneath it. The third sort of strategy here that they call private branding strategy is really what I would call a private labeling strategy. This is where you have store brands, all right? And so when they talk about private branding strategies, they're really talking about private labels, labels that only are sold at their companies. So the only place that you can buy Die Hard batteries is at a Sears or a Sears authorized store. Then they talked about mixed branding strategies, and mixed branding strategies, what they're talking about is making both your own national brand, but also then making making products for a store brand. So this is a company that does both manufacturers its own brands, but then also does some private labeling behind it. They're calling it a mixed branding strategy. That's fine. That's not what we would ordinarily call it, but you need to understand how these are matched together. Branding decisions, all right? We talked a little bit about brand names before, but let's just go through this so we remember exactly what we were talking about. Brand names are important. The name needs to be available. It should have no legal or regulatory restrictions. Initials aren't names. Those are what we call no-name names. The best names are locked down directly into the product's benefits. Things like Healthy Choice. And product names like that. Those are the best sorts of product names. Names should be pronounceable, simple, and emotional. They should fit the company and product's image. You should make sure that the name is pleasing to the ear and sight, and you should try to make it easy to remember. That is, how do you make it easy to remember? Once again, associations, and then check for existing meanings and negative connotations. Remember, we talked about that when we talked about as you translate it into foreign languages. Some other branding decisions that have to be made. One is the trademark. This is the distinctive sign or indicator used by an individual business or other legal entity to identify the product. This is the UNLV logo. You might notice that the UNLV are all attached, making the UNLV lettering a logo. Trade dress includes both the legal term and all of the other artwork associated with it, including colors. For instance, what are McDonald's colors? Well, it's brown and gold, right? It's the golden arches. So things like the golden arches, the way that the McDonald's restaurants looks, their color scheme is all part of their trade dress. Then we have something that's called a brand mark. All right, and this is the part of the brand that can't actually be said, but it's typically a symbol or a character or even a sound, like the little Intel sound, that provides visual or auditory recognition for the product. What about jingles and slogans? Once again, people have great ears for memory. And so many of the brands that have good jingles and slogans are ones that you'll remember. So branding decisions under packaging, things about branding decisions under packaging that need to be important is protection level. You'll notice now that almost every product has a safety seal on it, and they might also have shelf life dates on it. Best by or expires on this date. Packaging decisions also have to be environmentally sensitive. You might do packaging that helps reduce costs. That is, come up with the least expensive way to create environmentally sensitive packaging. But then packaging also has promotional value. In terms of a unique package, might help people to identify your brand on the shelves, and you also use your packaging as a communication benefits to explain what the product does and why a person should buy it. Now, last thing I want to talk about is something called brand equity. Your book uses this pyramid model of brand equity, and I think it's fine. It talks about brand awareness, brand performance, brand imagery, consumer feelings, consumer judgments, and consumer-based connections. Most of us, David Acker's approach to brand equity. And he argues that, by the way, that brand equity is the value of a brand. So, for example, if I have two cars sitting next to each other and they are exactly the same, but one has a Mercedes nameplate on it and one has a Hyundai nameplate on it, which one do you think would be worth more money? Of course, the answer is the Mercedes. Why? They were the same automobiles. Well, it's because the Mercedes brand has more brand equity. So brand equity has to do with competitive advantage. It has to do with how much is a brand name worth. And the value of brand equity is typically attributed to 5 factors. Brand awareness. Brands that have more awareness have more equity. Brand loyalty. Brands that have more brand loyal customers have more equity. Perceived value. Products that are considered to be higher quality and have more value are considered to have more brand equity. Brands that have more positive associations have more brand equity, and those that are associated with other positive assets also have more brand equity. So the idea of how do I build brand equity? I build brand equity by building awareness, by increasing brand loyalty, by making sure that I have good quality products that are perceived as high value, by associating my brand with other positive aspects, and by building other assets around it. Like, for instance, in the automobile business, a high-quality dealership network.